So good afternoon from Delhi, and we are privileged and to extend a very warm welcome to Justus Baron, speaker this afternoon. He is the research director at the Northwestern University and director at BRELA Research in Economics and Legal and Analytics, CEO and founder of FRANDLY, and a recognized expert in SEP policy and valuation. His work focuses on the empirical economic analysis of technological innovation and markets for technologies, with particular emphasis on technology standards, patents, and licensing schemes. Joining him is Tatiana, who worked at Compass Lexecon and has a PhD in economics. She is an expert on econometric modeling and focuses on understanding competitive ecosystems and identifying key value drivers. Currently, she's an assistant professor at a university in Chile. Just to give a context to the talk, for our audience who is joining remotely, as global 5G adoption accelerates, disagreements continue around the economic value of 5G adds to devices and services. These diverging perspectives are central to disputes in SEP licensing, where determination of FRAND terms depends on credible valuation. With a telecom subscriber base of 1.2 billion, India has the second largest telecommunication market in the world. These number indicates the emerging importance of standard essential patents and related disputes in the Indian subcontinent. I think this is one of the seminars where I think the economists are outnumbering the lawyers in a field which is so dominated by lawyers, and I'm really looking forward to it. So creating an efficient market for technologies is challenging, while there is no doubt that maintaining a balance between rewarding the SEP holders and ensuring access to standardized technology by follow-on innovators is critical for economies to harness the benefits of this technology, and more so for India, because as it aspires to be a developed economy by 2047, these technologies are critical to the economic development story as well. But what we are trying to struggle right now in India in our policy debates is what is the institutional path to achieve this balance, and how to create efficient markets for technology. And I think economists are very well equipped to answer that. SSOs, that is the standard setting organization, require the owners of patents covered by the standard to make a loose commitment to grant licenses on reasonable terms, especially performing a regulatory function, essentially doing that. So loose price commitments have been conducive to litigation. After the inclusion of these technologies into standards, frictionless licensing is not guaranteed. Reasons are well known for practicing lawyers. There is and economists, there is a divergence in the incentive structures of the licensor and the implementers. And given the non-rival nature of SEPs and their probabilistic nature adds to these frictions. In this context, in the seminar, we seek to address the following question. Do markets themselves offer solutions to the sources of frictions, and what could those be? Should licensing be left to the market or guided by regulatory frameworks? And what is a proper institutional response to achieve a balance between the rights of the SEP holders and implementers? Regulatory oversight now is increasingly finding or creeping into these discussions, and it has been proposed as a means to address the complexity of licensing within the SEP ecosystem, including misaligned incentive structures, information asymmetries, imbalances in bargaining power, and challenges in the determination of FRAND licensing terms. It is argued that there is a need for clear regulatory guidance and measures to help mitigate these frictions. Some regulatory proposals in India are the India's Sovereign Patent Fund, which also envisages a mechanism to centralize IP acquisition and licensing. This reform seeks to foster innovation and support SMEs by facilitating transparency and predictability. In contrast, and that is why today's seminar is very, very important, certain private solutions already exist to solve some of the intractable problems of asymmetric information, lack of transparency, bargaining power imbalance, or for example, Justus, who runs this FRANDLY.com, offers a centralized, accessible database that aggregates information on accept declarations, licensing terms, and essentiality assessments, providing implementers with a clear understanding of their licensing obligation. This webinar, therefore, will present new economic research from Friendly's forthcoming 5G value report, offering a quantitative view of the value of 5G's impact across technologies and product markets. Making my task easy, what I envisage to be a rich discussant, we are joined by Kadambari Prasad. She is the Vice President at Compass Lexecon, based out of London. And she has 10 years of experience in abuse of dominance cases, cartel investigations, merger control, and arbitration and litigation cases. Abhilasha Nautiyal, I'm presuming you're joining from Delhi, a partner at ICRIER Law and an experienced commercial disputes resolution lawyer focusing on IP litigation and mediation. She appears regularly before the High Court, district courts in Delhi, and has worked on cutting-edge issues such as IP licensing, competition law concerning patents. Just a brief introduction of the team here. I'm Payal Malik, moderator of the session, a visiting professor at ICRIER, hosting this webinar. I was formerly the advisor and head economics at the Competition Commission of India for almost a decade, between 2012 to 2023. Joining me is my research associates, Saloni Dhadwal and Aman Sinha, who's also working with us on the work we are doing at ICRIER. So no further ado, Justus and Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Malik. Thank you very much to the organizers at ICRIER for this invitation to speak and to give us the opportunity to present some of the findings and insights from our research. So I'm very happy also to be joined today by my dear colleague, Tatiana Rosa, who has been very important for much of the work that we will present today. So let me jump right to the content of this presentation, which is about the value of 5G. So as Professor Malik has rightly pointed out, the licensing of standard essential patents is subject to frictions. And ultimately, what drives many of these frictions is disagreement on the price of licenses, the fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory price that a licensee should pay to a licensor in exchange for the right to use patented technology that is essential to a standard. So these disagreements are at the heart of complex disputes about standard essential patents. And about 2 years ago, together with friends and colleagues Tatiana Rosa, Santiago Vergalo, and Yanis Gamara, we have started working on FRANDLY, which we hope is going to be a solution that contributes to make some of these problems more solvable. And in particular, the problem of a lack of objective benchmarks for FRAND licensing rates. So when I say that there is often disagreement about the FRAND rates, obviously that's to some extent just natural, and it's part and inherent to any commercial negotiation, where there can always be disagreement between reasonable people about the value of what is being exchanged. But FRAND determinations, the determination of what a FRAND rate for a license should be, is increasingly facts intensive. So parties, in addition to having just different opinions about legal considerations, about what are the norms in the industry, they also need a lot of facts and may disagree on what the facts are. And many of the facts that are very relevant to the determination of FRAND rates are just very difficult to access. And this includes facts and data about the prices of comparable licenses in particular, but it also includes facts about the value that the technology creates in the licensee's products. So this is where we believe we can make a contribution. We can hopefully provide some kind of common data infrastructure or facts infrastructure where people can have joint access to the facts in order to more easily come to an agreement. And in particular, we offer two different services or products. One is a platform where customers can access detailed data about SEP licenses, including whatever is publicly known about royalty payments and rates, and other terms of the licenses, such as the duration, scope, and so on. And this is paired with product market data so that we can more easily understand this information in terms of the rates that are implied by this. And all this is backed up by a comprehensive documents library so that every factual statement that is included in the platform has a clear link to a publicly available source. And in addition to the platform, we also work on hopefully a series of comprehensive research reports. So right now and today, we are having the pleasure of presenting the first of these reports, or some insights from the first of these reports, which is about the value of 5G. So this is heavily based and heavily draws from data that we have in the platform, but it is an independent research product that people can access as a standalone as well. And in a nutshell, the value of 5G, let me take a step back and say that, okay, what is it that we usually try to do when we determine friend rates for an SEP license? In many different jurisdictions, it has been recognized that an important guiding concept for the determination of friend rates is the outcome of a hypothetical negotiation. What would willing parties have agreed would be a reasonable price for a license in the absence of undue constraints? Nevertheless, this is a complicated, complex hypothetical exercise, and this complex hypothetical exercise should be heavily informed by actual empirical observable facts. And whenever it's possible, courts have often given preference to comparable licenses and have found that comparable licenses often provide the most reliable indication of the friend value of a license. Nevertheless, there are many situations, or there can be many situations, in which there are no sufficiently comparable licenses, or those licenses that are comparable might themselves not be friend, or then they need to be made, adjustments need to be made to these licenses to either account for factors that might make them not friend, or to make them more comparable. And all these adjustments and analyses require additional information, which is not found in the comparable licenses themselves. So there is, underneath the reference to comparable licenses or the hypothetical negotiations framework, there is what I would call an overarching framework, which is most clearly stated by the European Commission, for example, in its communication from 2017. Licensing terms have to bear a clear relationship to the economic value of the technology. So this is something that enters into friend determinations and is an important consideration even when we have comparable licenses, but it's even more prominent in situations in which we do not have such comparable licenses. And one particular aspect that we delve into this aspect in our report. But one particular aspect that I want to highlight today in this presentation is an intriguing variance between countries. And it is true that, at least in the case of 5G, that consumers all over the world use the same cellular communication technology. 5G is the same technology independently of where it is used. Nevertheless, the use of the same technology in different countries, in different markets, may be subject to different royalty rates. So this was, for example, stated by Justus in Untitled Planet versus Huawei. The comparable licenses show that rates are often lower in China than for the rest of the world. And in one Chinese court in Nanjing has actually explicitly stated that this difference in rates should is a reflection of what the court saw to be a difference in the value that technology adds to the products in different countries. So the court found that there's evidence that the same technology adds less value to a product sold in China than in other countries, and therefore the royalty rates in China should be lower. Similarly, we know that antitrust authorities in China have ordered Qualcomm to grant discounts to Chinese manufacturers for their sales made in China. Another Chinese court has also set lower rates, not only for China, but also for developing countries all over the world. And that even aligns with practices of licensors outside litigation. So, for example, we know from several pools that they offer different rates to licensees depending on where these products are sold. So this is something that seems to be observable in the licensing data, but we do not necessarily always have a rigorous economic analysis why that actually is the case, why we have different rates in different countries. And so in this presentation, given that we will present findings from our report on the value of 5G in the United States and in India, we have a little bit of a comparative angle. So we can look at this question and we can say, does 5G actually add the same value to products in India and in the US? And if not, what can be some of the drivers of this difference in value? Before we delve deeper into this, let me just spend one more minute on the definition of value that we use. So economists usually think of value in terms of demand and consumers' willingness to pay. So this is kind of the source of the value of a product, the source of the value of a technology is that consumers have demand for this technology, consumers have a willingness to pay for this technology. And that leads to creation of value that is then distributed between consumers, manufacturers, and licensors. Well, in the case of technologies, this notion of consumer willingness to pay is not that easy, actually. I mean, we know that technology is usually made available before the price for the technology is set. So consumers don't pay necessarily for the value of the technology when the product is sold. And then the question is, okay, what would they have been willing to pay if they had to pay is also a very complex and hypothetical question, which depends a lot on the market conditions in this hypothetical situation in which access to the technology had been restricted. Alternatively, we can also just look at, okay, how much money did the companies actually make in the different levels of the value chain? How much did the licensees make? How much did the component suppliers make? How much did the distributors, the network operators make? So we have kind of a profit accounting. But also this is a comparison with counterfactuals. I mean, how much profit would these companies have made in the absence of access to this technology? So these complicated counterfactual exercises, which are theoretically correct and grounded in theoretical economic theories, in solid economic theories of value, are very difficult to operationalize and implement. So in line with much of the practice in the case law, we adopt a much simpler, more descriptive conception of value, where we basically focus on the value that has actually been realized in the price. So how much did consumers actually pay for this? And we can apply this not only to the product market, we can also apply this to the technology market. So we ask two very relatively simple descriptive questions. What are licensees actually paying for 4G and 5G, which is basically what determines the comparable licenses? And in the product market, what are consumers actually paying? What is the incremental contribution of 5G to smartphone prices? So this is still not a straightforward question. It still requires economic analysis to answer that question, but it involves less complex modeling and consideration of complex hypothetical counterfactuals, which are never really fully observable. Just to give you a preview of the results before I invite Tatiana to walk you through a little bit more of the econometrics, how we came to these results. One word on the technology market side, which I'm not going to really present much today, is we also in the report estimate the value that is being exchanged in the technology market. What do we see companies actually paying for the licenses for 5G? And we focus this analysis on just 4 selected licensors where more data is available: Qualcomm, Ericsson, Nokia, and InterDigital, and estimate a 5G royalty yield on average of approximately 3%. But on the product market, which is going to be the focus today, we carry out a hedonic price regression model, which basically measures the incremental contribution of the technology to the price at which the product is sold. And here we find that in the United States, we find over a period 2020 to 23, the incremental value of 5G has been around $50 per smartphone. For India, based on a different data set, but the same methodology and the same characteristics of the phones, we find a lower value. We find $30 per phone. And as we're going to see in the latest part of the presentation today, we believe that the difference between the $50 per smartphone in the United States and $30 per smartphone in India is largely attributable to the fact that the devices are not necessarily the same. That the average characteristics of a device sold in India is different from the average characteristics of the device sold in the US, and that 5G adds more value to a device that is more commonly sold in the US as compared to a device that is more commonly sold in India. So this is basically what we think is the driver of this difference between $50 and $30. But with this, I would like to invite Tatiana to take the lead in presenting the actual econometric analysis.
Thank you very much, Justus, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar today. Can you listen to me well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When I cannot move, I cannot control the slide.
You should be able. You're controlling, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's me, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. So okay. So that was just introduced. I'm going to talk a little bit more of our estimation and how we arrived to these numbers. I just already tell you about the incremental value of 5G on top of 4G. So before we go to the 50 or the 30, let me tell you a little bit more what these 50 or these 30 are, and this very important concept that it's gonna be with us the whole webinar, and in all our report we're gonna focus on this same concept, that is the incremental value contribution of 5G on top of 4G. And let me emphasize this, because this is not the value of 5G per se. It's not the value of 5G if we compare it to now internet connectivity. It's going to just be this, as the word says, this increment of how much value 5G adds, in this case to smartphones, on top of 4G, compared to a phone that has only 4G connectivity. So with this idea of value in mind, and that's our definition of value, we're going to be estimating how much 5G adds to this value on top of 4G in different markets. So let me start by the end and spoil you the results. We're going to find that in the US, this incremental value is going to be around $50, 53 to be more specific, in our preferred specification. And then we're going to talk a little bit what means. And of course, we have done different robustness, and we have a different way of thinking about this. And when we do exactly the same approach for India, we find that this incremental value is around $30, 32 to be more precise. Then in the report, you can see we do the same thing for Europe and for India and for China. But for the sake of the time, we're gonna focus today, especially on India. We're gonna introduce some of the results for the US that also can help us as a benchmark. So to be able to calculate these numbers, of course, we have to have some data. So our data set, we scrape data from different websites, from the different markets, particularly for the US, Europe, China, and India. And we have more than 200 variables that covers phone characteristics, and we match it with historical price. So we're going to have prices by quarter, sometimes by month. We're going to have information on the popularity of these characteristics, the currency, and we're going to have a very extensive coverage. For the US, we have an initial coverage of over 9,000 devices. Also for Europe. Then for China, we have almost 14,000, and for India, around 2,000. So of course, this is an initial coverage of our data set. It doesn't mean we're going to be able to use them all for our estimation for these 50 and 32. So let me tell you a little bit more of what we're going to be able to use, that the information will have all the characteristics, and of course, the price information is also reliable over time. So let me just give you a little bit zoom in the India and the US samples we're going to use. So basically, we're going to restrict ourselves, of course, these observations that we have price, because our estimation of this incremental value is going to be based on the price of these smartphones. That's reduced our initial data set quite a lot. And of course, we want this, also we want to have what we call like prices. That means that we can observe for models prices in different moments of time. I'm going to show you that's important, particularly when we want to see how this incremental value of the technology changes over time. And we're going to see this is something very important when we think about the value of this technology. We're going to have, for India, around 50 brands, and a little less for the US, around 35. And what is very also interesting to note is that the average price in dollars in both markets is going to be very different, right? In India, the average price in our sample, that doesn't mean the average sale price for smartphones, just the ones we're going to use. And again, we're going to use these listing prices. It's going to be around $164. And in the US, it's going to be around $371. So part of this difference, and it's something that Justus is going to come back at the end, and I think it's behind most of these results, is that when we look at the Indian market, we're going to see very different brands and different relative important presence of, for example, Chinese brands. In India, we're going to see Chinese brands are way more important than in the US. And in India, as you here all well know, there are a lot of, also, it's very important, all the Indian brands. And usually those brands are going to have different prices. So let me take a step back and walk you through how we arrived to these 52 and 32 I told you at the beginning. So as I already mentioned, and I'm going to be a little bit repetitive here, we're going to focus on the incremental value of 5G on top of 4G. But ideally, we might think, oh, we would like to want to know how much this internet connectivity value is, not with respect to 4G, but overall. What's the value of connectivity in a smartphone? And all our methodology is going to be based in comparing smartphones with this characteristic. In this case, is the 5G technology with ideally the same smartphone, right? Without these characteristics. But of course, this is very complicated, and it's not observable in cellulars, that some of them do not have cellular connectivity. So it would be impossible for us to compare 5G against non-connectivity at all. Nevertheless, that happens with other products that are not smartphones, but are tablets. But if you want to buy a tablet, for many of these devices, we have the possibility to buy with and without cellular connectivity, right? And when we look at those prices, we see that, for example, this is the Apple iPad 11. We can see that when it only has Wi-Fi connectivity, it costs around $600. But when we add this cellular connectivity, it's around $750. So this $150 give us the idea what's the incremental value, in this case, of, it's not 5G, but all connectivity on top of, in this case, Wi-Fi. So, of course, tablets are a good starting point to understand how much is this incremental contribution of, in this case, connectivity, cellular connectivity. But we like to focus on smartphones. So we're gonna move a little forward. So maybe I'm taking too long. Just yeah, let me know if I need to speed up a little bit. Okay, this is not Okay, I'm not being able to change the slides. Okay, now yes, it's back.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So we try to do this exercise now with smartphones, since we're interested in this internet cellular connectivity. And we cannot find it without any cellular connectivity, but we're able to find some phones that are available with the 5G connectivity and without the 5G connectivity. Without 5G connectivity means 4G connectivity and the previous generations. And for some models that we have exactly the same phone, that's for example the Samsung S10. We have the listed price when it has 5G, that is $1,400. But we also observe the same model is offered without this connectivity for $1,150. So here we can see that there is an incremental value of $250 that is added when we have 5G on top of 4G. So throughout all this report and all this webinar, we're going to be trying to estimate, we're going to estimate this incremental value of 4G on top of 5G on top of 4G. So ideally, what we would like to have, all the phones like this one, right? We would like to have 1 million phones with all different characteristics with and without 5G connectivity. But of course, we know this is not possible, right? Not all phones have this feature that we can buy them with and without this 5G connectivity, but there's a little bit more than the Samsung S10. So we try to gather as much pairs as we were able to, and we have this what we call twin phones that are exactly the same model with 5G connectivity and without. That's the same example I showed you before. So and we're able to connect those prices for different years. So this is the here we have a table from 2020 to 2024. This is for the US market. And we have the average price of these devices, the ones that were offered with 5G, and the ones that had exactly same model were offered with 4G connectivity. And we did, as we did with the Samsung in the previous example, we did this for these 25 pairs of phones. And when we can see this is the price difference that we computed over time. And something that is very interesting is to see how this price difference is reduced over time, suggesting that the incremental value of 5G might be reduced with the penetration of the technology over time. But of course, even if this looks like a very clear way of thinking what's the value added of 5G on top of 4G, because we are talking about exactly the same phone, these phones, of course, they are not a representative sample of smartphones, right? Because the ones that we were able to collect data were a very particular subset of this phone. So ideally, we would like to have this for all of them. We cannot do that. And therefore we would like to use our econometric and statistical tools to try to somehow replicate this experiment of having with and without 5G technology. So before I tell you a little bit more about our statistically and econometric strategy, let me tell you that something that also is going to affect the price of these phones, and that's the selection we're going to see in the ones I already show you, is that there are some characteristics that correlates with the price of the phone, but also it correlates with the fact that these phones have or do not have this 5G connectivity. For example, one example we picked to show you today is the display size of a phone. For example, usually you can see here that the biggest the display size, the more priced is the phone. But also, the biggest this display size, the more likely is that these phones are going to have 5G connectivity. So that poses a challenge, right? Because we're going to see phones that are more expensive, but also are more likely to have 5G connectivity. So we would like to compare this with those with 4G. It's not only the connectivity that will be changing, but also some characteristics that adds to the price of the phone. So this is our challenge, and what we are going to do to try to disentangle those effects, we're going to use our econometrics techniques. We're going to estimate an hedonic regression. So what's the idea? The idea is that we want to compare the same product, right? Apples with apples. So what we're going to do is that we're gonna estimate this hedonic regression that we're gonna include in these regressions a lot of characteristics of these phones. And I'm not sure I'm going to have time to explain very well how we choose these characteristics, but we also use some statistical method to choose over these 200 variables that I already mentioned, because of course, as you can imagine, many of these characteristics are correlated, right? I mean, the better phones are going to have the biggest screen, the highest resolution. So we have to pick there. And what we're going to do is to estimate this regression, allowing controlling for all the characteristics we can for the phone. Some the ones are going to be directly observed, some other ones are going to be introduced as fixed effects in our model, and we're going to estimate just the price difference between those that have 5G, 4G, once we hold all these other characteristics constant. So basically, the idea is that once we include all this in the model, it's like we're going to imagine we include the display size. So the idea is that for a given display size, what is the price difference between a phone that has 5G with one that do not have? And that's basically the main idea of our regressions. And you can read a little bit more on the report. I'm happy to talk about it later, but for the sake of the time, I'm gonna move a little bit on the result. So this is this good idea. We're not the first one to address it or to use it in these cases. So Justus is gonna tell you a little bit more how these hedonic regressions have been already used in the past for patent litigation.
Yeah, maybe in the interest of time, let me just do a 10-second. Basically, the method that Tatiana is explaining is something I wouldn't say is widely accepted, but it's something that has certainly been proposed in a number of cases in China, in the US, in the UK, both in SCP and non-SCP cases. And in many of these cases, courts have rejected the analysis, not because the hedonic regression analysis itself was found unreliable, but because of the specific way it was implemented by the expert in that particular case. And in many cases, what actually is found to be challenging is not the determination of the value of the technology, but then how the value is apportioned between the different patent holders that have patents related to that technology. So this is, in a nutshell, like the summary of the case law. In the report, you can see more of this, but I think we should, in the interest of time, get to the results so that we have a little bit of time to talk about India.
Yeah, sorry if maybe I'm taking too long. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. So as I told you at the beginning, this 52 is the average aggregated value of 5G on top of 4G. But of course, this average is the average across many dimensions, right? One dimension is the average across time. As our initial analysis show this difference, this incremental value difference of prices between phones with 5 and 4G diminished over time. So what we did is we also estimate with our regression approach, we also estimate this aggregated value for different moments in time. So we did this for the US, and what we can see here is that at the beginning when 5G was introduced in the US, I think this is important, it's a difference with the Indian market in 2020. So when it was first introduced, this incremental value was way higher that it's going to be over the years. And particularly when we go to 2024, it's going to be practically zero. And it started, this incremental value was around $200 higher for phones with 5G. And we go for the Indian market, we estimate this same for this. Remember, we have this 32. That was the average incremental value of 5G on top of 4G for the Indian market. But when we look at this contribution over time, we see exactly the same pattern. It started at a lower value, but we also see that when it was introduced in 2022 in India, it has a higher value that is going to be right now, for example, that is practically zero. So finally, this is good.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
maybe just to, so I think that one of the key focuses of our presentation today is why is that we see this lower value of the technology in India than in the United States, and what does this mean for the rates that licensees should pay for their sales in India and the US. And so we had different theories, what could explain variation in value. And one of the theories is simply that the network is slower to roll out in India. And that's definitely the case when we look at the number of base stations deployed. So we see that if we look at especially the earlier years, 21, 22, we see that 5G creates less value in a phone in India simply because there is a smaller network to which these phones can connect, but this has relatively quickly caught up. And then the other thing that we can also see is that just the use of the technology was slower to pick up, and but also here we see that it has quickly caught up and is probably overtaking the United States in terms of the number of 5G subscriptions per country. So the question is, if we still see this difference in value, what can drive this difference in value? And one of the relevant facts that really stands out to us is the fact that when we only focus on higher end phones, this discrepancy actually is smaller. So only looking at the higher end phones, we still see that 5G adds more to the price of these phones in the United States and in India, but it's a smaller percentage difference. So here we see 62% in value added to an Indian phone as compared to 82 in the United States. So as Tatiana has already said, we know that the characteristics of these phones are very different between these different markets, which is largely related to the fact that different brands have different market shares in these different markets. So we see in our sample, we see brands such as Intex, Carbon, Micromax, Celcon, which have significant market shares in India, but don't make significant sales in the US. We also see US companies such as Apple having a larger share in the US, and brands such as Xiaomi, Huawei, Poco, OnePlus, Oppo, Realme from China that have significant share in India. So all these differences in just who sells phones, what phones are sold, what are the characteristics of these phones, and what are the average prices of these phones, they just lead to differences in how 5G will impact the prices of these devices, because we see in all different markets that we have studied, we just see a significant heterogeneity in how 5G impacts the prices of different brands, but also the prices of different phones, depending on their characteristics. But to wrap up and leave some time to the discussion, sorry for going over time, we want to conclude on what we think is the main question that is still to be addressed, which is, once you have estimated and determined the value of the technology, or the aggregate value that the technology creates in this limited definition of value that we have explained, it still needs to be apportioned between the different contributors to that value. So in particular, it needs to be apportioned between the manufacturer and the licensor, because the licensor does not capture the entire value that the technology creates in the product. And once you have identified the portion of the value that should go to the remuneration of the patents as a whole, then you still need to apportion this aggregate royalty among the different patent holders. And also there are many different views over how this can and should be done. And as I already briefly alluded to when I showed you the list of applications of this methodology in the case law, this has often proven to be the difficult part, where courts have not been satisfied that the expert had a reasonable fact-based analysis for justifying the way that he proposed apportioning the value between the different participants in the value chain. But with this, we conclude our presentation today. Let me just point you to the report where we do many more things. So we talk obviously about the licensing revenues, which we haven't done much today here. And on the product market side, we also do manufacturer-specific value estimates, which we haven't shown. And also, in addition to US and India, we cover additional regions, and in particular, China and Europe. But with this, thank you very much for your attention, and we are very much looking forward to the discussions and questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Justus, and thanks, Tatiana. Just very, very interesting and very simply done, and so we could understand it very well. So the question which comes immediately to my mind is because we're in a conference where Sir Lord Justice Richard Arnold said it's all about the price. So it's so the other things are strawman, but it is the coming to a price discovery and agreeing on a price. So it's all about price. And as you said in your presentation, it is extremely fact intensive. And another important point which we have made is that the price would depend upon the geographical areas because of the valuation to the end consumer based on various other characteristics. So just I was then trying to wrap my head around how then whether courts, when they're determining global FRAND rates, can rates be actually global, or they need to take into account the differences across geographies. And then the apportionment question. The apportionment question again remains, I guess, what you're saying still remains unanswered, and that is then left to the courts based on the facts and based on other evidence which is presented to them. So these are some of the questions, but I will stop here. But I will request now Kadambari to step in and basically when we're talking about even regulating this space, what can be regulated? If price is the thing which needs to be regulated, still it would require, say, coming from my knowledge of regulatory economics, still it would require a lot of information on the table to even come at a regulated price, so to speak. So if these kind of solutions, market-led solutions are present and market-led tools, how good are they in completing these markets for technologies, and how these tools can therefore be market correction in some sense, not requiring overt regulation of prices in the SEP space. So just wanted to have your views or any other views on the presentation.
Yeah,
Thank you very
so
much.
thank you. Kadambari first? Oh, I'm sorry. Or should we take
I'll
the
let you go,
questions?
and then I'll do my thing.
Hi,
Sorry.
Kadambari. Wanted to share some slides?
Yeah, sorry, I was giving Justus some time to respond if he wanted to, but I'm happy to share.
Yeah, Justus.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick on the apportionment piece, this is not something that we have addressed in this report, but I mean, this is something that we definitely plan to work on in the future. And in general, our take is that we do not try to do everything FRAND. I mean, there will always be other aspects to be considered, but we try to identify specific questions where we see a certain repetition in the case law, where different people repeatedly do the same thing. So we identify a little bit of wasteful duplication of efforts, and we try to provide certain efficiency gains by just centralizing this, doing it once very thoroughly for all kinds of different products and markets, and then making this broadly available. With respect to this regulation question, I would just highlight that just as any other empirical method that is based on observed prices, in effect, the hedonic regression is an ex post analysis. It observes the value that has been created in a market once consumers have bought these products at a particular price. So, which is very different from the exercise that, for example, the European Commission proposed when they created this SEP regulation, where they said that before the product is even on the market, experts should come together and basically offer an opinion on what this technology is worth, which is for me a very difficult thing to conceptualize, because at least as an economist, I would be very hard pressed to give an opinion on the value of something that hasn't even reached the market yet, because in my mind, as economists, whatever we can do to come up with a price needs to start with a price. We need to observe prices that are realized in a particular market. So these regulations that try to substitute for the market, that say, okay, we want to set the price so that consumers and producers know what the price will be before a market for the product has even formed. This is conceptually on a completely different level, and our tool our hedonic regression analysis would not be suitable for that, because you would need to have a completely different tool where you can look at value indicators before the market has even formed, which would be a different nature of analysis than the one we have done. But with this, sorry, Kadambari.
Yeah, a very good answer, because what we hear from the SME perspective, and again from conferences, is that they are using something, consuming something, and they don't know the price of what they're consuming, and hence it gives them a sticker shock. But as you have clarified, it is not possible to arrive at a price prior to the use. It is the use which will then lead to the price discovery. So yeah, Kadambari, please. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll just share my screen. Is that visible to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just quickly responding to the discussion you were just having as well. I was in a conference when the ICP regulation was being discussed a year and a half ago. I was at a conference, and I think that was exactly my reaction, is that it's almost like an economist on a deserted island with a can of beans, and you have to assume a can opener to open the can of beans. And it's a bit asking for the aggregate royalty for a product that doesn't exist. It's a bit like asking the answer to that question, and it would be a completely bizarre thing to do. So I'm very happy it's not really going ahead in that format. So the first thing I wanted to say, I'll be quick because I know we are short on time. So first thing I wanted to say was thank you very much to Justus and Tatiana. And Tatiana, great to see you after so long. I think we met actually when I was doing my first FRAND case, my first hedonics 10 years ago. So, and you showed me around Madrid, so very nice to see you. So thank you very much for developing this tool, because as a practitioner, it is so difficult to do this exercise every single time in every single different case, and to reinvent the wheel every single time, and and we do it every time, but we can't use the results in any public format because it always has confidential data. So it's fantastic to be able to have something that's out there that we can refer to that does this calculation on an industry basis. So it is definitely of great value in a time like this. What I would like to talk a little bit about is maybe the thing that sits on, on top of, kind of the bigger questions, Justus, that you were talking about earlier. And the one thing I want to speak about is, well, to what extent, why do we need to do this anyway, right? So in normal markets, we would just let the parties engage in a discussion. They would come to an agreement on the price, and that's the price. And if it's a market that's working well, we don't really need to regulate that price. Here, of course, we have market failures because we have this kind of large endogenous sunk investment. We have market power that's conferred by standardization. So for those kind of things, obviously, we need the FRAND commitment. And so the question of what is reasonable here is the main question, which is, obviously, we want both parties to participate. So it can't be so high that the implementers don't make any money, or the royalties, or the people don't buy the product. And it can't be so low that investments aren't recouped and the patent holder doesn't have the incentive to make them in the first place. But in the middle, there's the question of, well, what is the right price? Essentially, we have to draw a line in that gap. And the big question for us practitioners is, well, where is that line? And from an economics perspective, the theory is very clear. It's, there's a joint contribution that makes this, creates the joint value. What you want to be able to extract is the incremental contribution. The incremental contribution is just the marginal contribution made by each party to the thing. So it doesn't have to be in the middle. What it has to be is manage at a level that manages the incentives for both parties to continue to participate in the exercise. And this, is of course the case in the FRAND debate and the SCP debate, but it's also a much wider issue these days, right? Because we have a lot of pricing disputes. It's the same thing with app stores and app developers. It's the same thing with search engines and publishers. It's the same with large traffic originators, Netflix and things, and MNOs. So these are the kind of pricing, even with GenAI licensing and copyright. it's the same thing that we're asking, which is, there's joint value, how do we split it? And it's very difficult, as you mentioned. So the one way to, the economics 101 way to think about it is of course that, if we have a standard market, there is value to obviously to the producers who make profits, but there's also value to the consumers who consume that product and keep some consumer surplus at the end of it. And it's that willingness to pay, which is higher than the price, that gives you the value to the consumers. And if we want to think about economic value, it's really the sum of all those values, even though the consumer part is very difficult to calculate and it's riddled with assumptions, but it is part of the equation for sure. What it does and what we can think about the technology improvement in this space is that while there is willingness to pay for various consumers at various levels, when there is an improvement in technology, we expect the willingness to pay to increase, because if consumers value that technology, they will pay more for the same product. The discussions we were just having, you would pay more for a phone that has 5G rather than a phone that has only 4G. And what that will do eventually is it will shift the willingness to pay out a little bit. And what we're interested in is the blue shaded area where there is gain in consumer surplus, and there is also gain in producer surplus. And that's going to give you the incremental value that's associated with this new technology. There's, of course, higher costs, because we want to, if we look at, rather than the product market, if we look at the technology market, there are going to be higher royalties for 5G versus 4G. And that means that the costs will also increase. So what we're looking at is exactly the complicated counterfactual analysis, Justus, that you were mentioning, which is that we start from, say, the red dot, where we have the old equilibrium in the 4G world, and then we move to the green dot, where you have greater demand because it's a better product, more functionality, and you have higher costs because the chipsets are more expensive. You have to pay royalty costs and other things like that. And our job as practitioners in this is to estimate that incremental value and see how that's split, and how that split is affected by various royalty rate thought experiments that we can do. And the one thing that, of course, we do and has been the focus of this presentation has been the share to the implementers, which is, of course, I've called it here pairwise comparisons, but I think Tatiana, you mentioned it's the twin example. So it's the same thing with the iPad with and without, with the same product, but with a different technology. Or you have the more sophisticated hedonic regressions, where we control for lots of other characteristics, and we can use that to get the premium. But all that gives you is the price premium. In addition, what we want is royalty yield, which I think you guys have also looked at in your report, and that gives you, to some extent, what the licensors are able to appropriate from that technology. What's missing is the economic value. Very, very difficult, but it does end up being very central in the debate. And this is something that can be done with an economic model. It's very difficult. It's full of assumptions. But what we can do is, if we have a model of how consumers behave, and if we have a model of competition, we can superimpose those on the data that we find on the prices. And that gives us some way of assessing the total economic value. And then we can ask the apportionment question, which is the second complicated piece. And I wanted to just plug a little paper that my colleagues have done, which looks at exactly this question. So they also do a bit of hedonics. I was trying to do some math while Justus and Tatiana was speaking. I think the numbers are not that different from yours, particularly in India, if I am doing the maths right. If you have $30, that $164 phone, that comes out to be, I think, around 19% as well. So we might have very similar results. But they also do the consumer welfare part of it. So, and that allows us to calculate what is the share of revenue or share of total value that licensors, licensees, and consumers are appropriating from, for a particular royalty rate. And it's something that's difficult, but I think ultimately it's not a question that we can avoid. So at some point it's very difficult for me as an economist to sit and say 7.7% is the right number and anything less than that is problematic. But what it does is it puts a discipline on the exercise, and for a range of rates that you might get from comparables, the rates that you might get from other top-down approaches, rates that you might get from licensees agreements, things like that, we can plug them into the model, and then we can see what's the distribution of surplus that creates. And that actually gives a judge quite a lot to work with, and gives them that freedom to be able to see the implications of what each rate might mean. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to try and stop there. I can talk a lot about other things and policy questions, but maybe I'll stop right now and give Abhilasha some time.
So is there any specific topic you'd like me to reflect on, or
I think you're on
I
mute.
think you're muted.
Muted. So I'm just coming back to you, Abhilasha. There was a question from the audience, so
Right.
I guess I got muted. So I'll just request Saloni to quickly read it for us.
Arvind Menon is asking, in cases where the technology provides system-level advantages, such as seamless handovers or low latency connectivity in 5G, does focusing on marginal price differences risk overlooking the broader impact of simply having that technology embedded in the product? Someone would like to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can offer my take, but I'd also be curious about Kadambari's take. I mean, it's or Tatiana's. I think that it's clear that we are not capturing the full value. I mean, Kadambari has pointed out the consumer surplus as being one source of value that we are not capturing. I think in the case of 5G, there's a lot of efficiency gains in network operations. So there's cost reductions for the network operators. There are societal gains. I mean, 5G offers connectivity in remote areas, underserved areas. So all these things are well beyond what we can capture with the pure focus on the price that is being exchanged. What I would offer is that the price is nevertheless a good value to look at, because it basically is a very close to what the implementer is capturing, especially if licensing takes place at the end product level. And then if the implementer doesn't capture the consumer surplus, I'm not entirely sure that the consumer surplus is all that relevant for how much the implementer should pay to the licensor. And the same goes with efficiency gains in network operation, for example, or with societal benefits. We can, in a policy context, clearly say that focusing on the price of the handset itself is clearly too limited. But in the context of a negotiation between a handset manufacturer and the licensor, I think that the price is relevant. And I think that it might be a shortcut, and we do not lose that much that is actually relevant for this particular negotiation between these two companies when we look at the price of the product itself.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Abhilasha, sorry to keep you waiting, but you, as a lawyer, have the last word. You work in the courts. What are the disputes regarding, and do you think the courts can play a good role in uncovering the facts, because the whole dispute is about facts which need to be uncovered? Or do you think regulatory agencies need to step in? And one more, I think it's not a topic related to this conversation, but still it will be important. that not being able to arrive at a consensus on the FRAND rates, and if there is a dispute, how do competition authorities then look at this imbalance, and should the competition authorities have a role to play?
Great. Thank you. I'll try and address each of those three topics. But to start with, when courts enter the fray, of course, there's already a dispute. There has been a disagreement on between two parties on what sort of a reasonable compensation is justified in that scenario. What I thought was interesting today is that a lot of what is discussed is possibly in the zone to avoid that disagreement, which is a welcome step, even from the court's point of view. So for the parties to reasonably assess the technology in the negotiation phase, in that commercial discussion, is a big positive. Now coming to courts and what role can courts play? From the Indian context, the way we see these litigations play out is courts have endorsed comparables like many other jurisdictions. So we are seeing a very different analysis by the time these disputes are in court, where it's going to be identifying what are the closest comparables, what other sort of factors need to be weighed in terms of introducing those comparables in the evidence, to what extent do they remain relevant, how are they going to be unbundled, and things like that. We, at least in India, have not seen a case where the court did not appreciate comparables. Theoretically and hypothetically, we could see that in the future, but we have not seen that so far. So we don't have guidance from courts there. But the court signaling of endorsing comparables does give a signal to the parties in negotiations who are not litigating in terms of what is the court's outcome or appreciation of this evidence going to be. And that is a very positive signal from the court, because at the end of the day, litigation is a means to an end in these disputes, as in many things. So if those guidelines are set by the court, that does give some direction for parties to avoid litigation, to not even end up in litigation. So that's where the Indian courts are in terms of how they would look at this. In the Indian experience, we haven't seen evidence beyond comparables so far. So we could, but we don't know. Now, in terms of who else should be in this zone in terms of regulation or introducing any other guardrails here, my sense is, as far as the Indian scenario is concerned, we have good guidance from our courts, and we keep getting periodic guidance from courts on how these disputes actually eventually fare in court. And then those are the sort of guidelines that parties follow even in the negotiations, because the idea is to avoid litigation, at least to start with. So that's my sense here. At the end of the day, it's a commercial negotiation. And if there is further information of the nature that is discussed today for the market to function in this field, then that may be the best outcome of how these things play out. And on the last aspect of competition authorities and how do they interact here? Again, in the Indian context, this may not be how the rest of the world views this issue. We are guided by how our courts have treated the interaction of competition law with patent law. And the current guidance so far from at least the Delhi High Court is, well, they shouldn't be interacting at all at this point for patent licensing. This is before the Supreme Court. It will see its day. We don't know what the final outcome will be. But yes, the reason why this litigation even ended up in court about overlap was because there is overlap, which is why the court had to decide how should they interact. But as of now, as a lawyer, based on what is the current law, all I can say is that the role is very limited in the Indian market. And then, of course, basis what the Supreme Court says on how these things should interact, there could be a different answer in the near future.
To follow on question, but at a more fundamental level, the competition authorities still not will be able to answer the pricing question, because as you said, it is a matter of negotiation between two private parties. So just to put that thought, because the jurisdiction of competition authorities has been established in other cases where there are overlapping jurisdictions, whether it is concurrent or whether it is sequential, as you know, the Bharti case. So let's see how does the Supreme Court view this, and it is a different ecosystem than the ecosystem which was discussed in the Bharti case, and so perhaps a uniform law about concurrent jurisdictions may not emerge, and it may also emerge on the basis of cases and on the basis of the law of the land. So that said, so one more question to you is about global FRAND rates, because now various jurisdictions have started setting global FRAND rates, whether through when both parties are agreeing to it or not, or imposition from the courts. What is your view, given what you heard today? So, because in India also we may need to look at the Indian specificities and characteristics of the market in order to arrive at an India-specific rate. So, your views would be important to know.
I think that's a very interesting topic because it has two aspects to it. One, of course, is the Indian court's power to entertain or decide any issue about rates. And in what context can they decide this under prevalent law? And second is, should there be something specific for India or for any specific jurisdiction? So I think these are two layers to this question. The first topic, in terms of can an Indian court really decide, what is a FRAND rate in the first place? At least basis current law, there are two aspects when the court does touch this topic here. One topic is about whether parties are in compliance with their FRAND obligations, offers and counter offers. Do they benchmark? How do they sort of sit with the FRAND obligations? And that's when the court may necessarily have to look at, how are they going to do it? Whether they do it just by conduct is a different question, but in terms of assessing the rate, yes, that is where the courts could touch this. And the second aspect on computation of damages. If there's a successful plaintiff, there will be a computation exercise, a hypothetical negotiation could be one way to do it, and that's when they will look at what would be the suitable rate at which damages should be awarded. In both of these instances, because our courts are guided by comparables, it completely depends on what they yield. So I don't think in every case it will be the same outcome. Having said that, a lot of the litigation that does end up in court ends up between parties of, predictable strengths. So I don't expect drastically different outcomes because of the nature of parties that litigate, but it may not be the same outcome in terms of whether it will always be a global rate or not. It will completely depend on how the comparables are unpacked and what they reveal, and if there are comparables in the first place. So the second aspect, region-specific rates. The way I have seen it so far, at least in litigation, and this is perhaps not just from India, but other jurisdictions, the past conduct of licensors and licensees could reveal how different regions are treated differently. So if there is a justification for doing that, it may already translate into actual practice in the field.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just before I end, we have one more question from the audience, and I'll ask Saloni, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, Saloni.
I think from a legal standpoint, how do courts benefit from the economic expert testimony in SAP litigation, especially when determining non-discriminatory royalty rates under the FRAND obligation? This is from the audience.
So I may not be most suitably placed in terms of answering this, but my experience as a litigator is, and why we introduce this testimony in court, is there are facets of not just the law, but facts that are involved in litigation, where the expertise does not lie with the court, the expertise does not lie with the litigators. And for those topics, you will need it. Now, is there a simpler way of doing it? There could be, but the endorsement of certain views to expert evidence is perhaps the most credible way of presenting things in court. So from a litigator's point of view, that's one reason why I would do it. And that's one reason why I would expect my counterparty to put forth something similar, and then for the judge to decide, and they could even have their own independent assessment of these topics.
Yeah, so Kadambari, have you or your friends at Compass been given us expert testimony in SCP dispute cases, and what's the nature of these testimonies in the rest of the world?
All the time. And unhelpfully, the statements that is usually made on the day of your examination is, it all rests with you. So, all the calculations, I think that there is, of course, the conceptual part of, what does it mean to be fair and reasonable? What does it mean, and specifically in this market versus other market? What does it mean for geographical differences? What does it mean for differences in size and types of licensees? What is a comparable? How do we select the right one? What is the right way to adjust the one we select to make it more relevant to the case at hand? And then how do we use that to give an opinion on, how the value is shared between the parties? Is it reasonable compared to other benchmarks? All those things that are, I think, the backbone of these cases are things that we tend to opine on, not just in litigation, but also in a lot of arbitration cases, which now we seem to have many more of, because it's a way to keep it out of public.
Yeah, so our courts do get, in the sense, lawyers do dominate these economic cases and arguments that we know. I tried very hard at the Competition Commission to have expert testimony from the economists. The law had to be changed to be able to identify economists as a class of experts. Otherwise, they were in a no man's land. So let's see how things take shape going ahead. And Justus, I wonder whether you have been now, or would it be a conflict of interest? I don't know. Have you been a part of expert testimonies in court cases?
Yes, I mean, I have not testified yet, but I have been involved in court cases, and both in FRAND and other patent-related cases as well. Yeah, so I have similar experience to Kadambari in this respect.
Right. So that's something which I think the Indian courts will slowly adopt. It'll where economists become voice in economic laws. And so when I came into this SEP discussion, I thought the digital markets were a highly polarized debate, but this seems to be far more polarized than even the digital markets because of the complexities of this markets. And thank you so much to Justus and your colleagues and Abhilasha and Kadambari for spending your afternoon with us and speaking to us. And I'm sure all who are tuned in benefited from this discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.